The article is about the growing epidemic of myopia, actually globally. And I want to start, though, with a personal story.
But it's been particularly noticed in East and Southeast Asia.
In Asia, yes.
Yep.
And it is now being noticed in the West. And there's a difference in how Asians have dealt with it and how it's being dealt with in the West. But
just one more thing before you tell your story. The standard story among Western-trained eye doctors is it's genetic. And somehow it's the very rare and highlighted in this article, doctor of ophthalmology who says, yeah, but why then are so many more children showing up with myopia when their parents don't necessarily have it?
So I would say that a little differently. The story has been that it was genetic, and the rate at which it is accelerating has forced those who make that claim to back off it because it's clearly so implausible.
Right, but the article describes it as like, this is the standard, this is the standard
It has
story.
been, but my point is going to be, this was nonsense from the get-go. It was always obvious that was a dumb explanation. Mm-hmm. And in any case, let me tell my little anecdotal story. So I was a child once, and I had terrible eyesight, the kind that makes parents fret and eye doctors discuss exotic solutions. Okay, I had an astigmatism, and I was prescribed bifocal glasses. As a child, I had bifocal glasses. I was sentenced to exercises in which one eye was to be patched for half an hour at a time every day of the week, I believe. Anyway, here's the thing. I was the kind
How
of... How
compliant were you?
Not even a little. Not
Shocking.
even a... Yeah, shocking knowing
Totally
me, right?
shocking.
But okay, so that is a very, very sad story, except for what happens next, right? My eyes completely cure themselves.
Right.
Okay. I've had great eyesight, and I went until, just the cusp of 50 before I needed to actively do anything for my reading. I could read, I had great distance vision, I still have great distance vision. What happened? Well, it was obvious to me that there was something about what we are all told about eyes that just isn't right. The story that eyes that were so badly formed that they required all of this elaborate technology and these, ruthless interventions in order to get them to function well enough for me to live a normal life, right? The fact that that turned out to be false is inconsistent with the basic explanation of how vision works. In other words, if my eyes were malformed as a kid, the chances that they would become well-formed as an adult are essentially zero, right? Unless you have a developmental process that has a feedback in it, right? Malformed eyes as a kid could be even more malformed as an adult if whatever process was off kilter continued to go off kilter. But what happened to me implies that there is a feedback inside of development that perceives the malformation of the eyes and corrects it, okay? What I did not understand, because I had heard the shape of your eyes is clearly a genetic phenomenon, blah, 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 right? What I did not understand is the shape of your eyes. Yes, the basic shape is specified by the genes, but there is muscular architecture which modifies these things. And if what you do is you put a corrective lens in front of your eyes, then you're denying your eyes the information by which they might self-correct, right? So I have been grumbling to myself, as you know, for decades about the fact that the huge fraction of the population that needs glasses as kids is obviously downstream of the fact that we are interrupting a developmental process. We are doing something that is causing the eyes to be malformed in the first place. Very likely that has to do with an alteration between an alteration of the environment and the distance at which we typically work. A hunter-gatherer child may be doing a little bit of close work, but they're doing an awful lot of distance work. And we are doing an awful lot of close work, and maybe there's nothing to be done about that. But there's a basic hypernovelty question here.
Well, there's certainly something to be done about getting the fact that many people are getting no distance vision.
No
right?
distance
And
vision.
This is one of the 3 things we advise at the end of every podcast, right? Get outside. And there are competing ideas as written in this article about what's the benefit of getting outside, even though all these ophthalmologists now saying, yeah, you should spend more time outside. Is it the bright sunlight or is it the open spaces? Like, it's probably both.
Right. Well, so there's also something missing from this article.
There's a lot missing.
There's a lot missing, but they talk about the fact that people have suspected that the close work might be a problem, but it's difficult to demonstrate because for every kid who has a problem with it, there's another kid who doesn't have a problem with it. Yada yada yada. Hypothesis for you that the feedback involved in correcting the shape of the eye, getting the eye to be approximately spherical, which it should be rather than oblong, that feedback is also sensitive to what you are looking at. What is the effect of looking at something that's this far away from you that appears to be something very far away from you?
Yes.
Right? If you are looking at a picture of mountains, right, or you are looking at a screen on which mountains are displayed, you are sending a completely inconsistent signal, right? You are, maybe there's a flag for, distant object. Oh, I'm looking at a distant object. How distant? Oh, it's about 7 or 8 inches from my eye, So what does that do to your development, right?
Yeah.
So in any case, I want to go back to the article and I want to talk about a couple of things just to place it in context. I do recommend people look at this article. I would recommend that they extract the value from it, the description of our awakening to what we're doing to our children and the various things that may be done to prevent this from happening to children who haven't yet suffered from this or are only beginning to, right? That is a very useful article. But the article is completely maddening in the way it portrays this and in the way it effectively defends the, superstitions of ophthalmology, right, into the present, where, how many children have we damaged because we haven't gotten serious about this until now, when it has been obvious that we should have been for at least many decades. All right, so I wanted to connect it to the DarkHorse episode in which I talk to Steve Patterson about the Dark Age, which he and I both believe is happening. We have a slightly different take on it, but we had a very good discussion. Suggest people watch it. One of the things that I love about Steve's take on the Dark Age is he has a list of things that are contributing to the darkness, right? What is blinding scientists to what is in front of them? And my favorite of them is he says there is a chronic tendency to underestimate the complexity of the system being looked at, right? In other words, if you have a kind of Bio 101 textbook view of physiology and genetics, you have the idea, there are genes, they describe how to build a person. And they basically blueprint the morphology, right? So if your eyes are the wrong shape, it's probably because your genes are spelled wrong, right? No, there aren't nearly enough genes to blueprint a body. What there are very simple rules that cause a body to emerge in light of information that is encountered in the physical universe. And the eyes are a prime candidate for this sort of thing because, your heads are different sizes. You've got 2 parents who may come from different parts of the world. What the hell gene would you even write for that? Yeah. You need a system in which 2 half genomes can come together, having come from different environments with different levels of close and distant work and all of that, and they can produce an eye that works. How do you do that?
There has to be feedback at every level and at every moment.
Right. And so one of the places I would say we chronically misunderstand biology is we tend to look at the adult organism and we look at the genome and we say, the genes say how you get there. And then we ignore the fact that there's this very long process of development in which the body gets to discover how it interacts with the world and correct all sorts of processes. And the eye, nothing is more important than whether you can see the important things in your world, the things relevant to your fitness. So the idea that, your eye is misshapen, right? Oh, well, you happen to have muscles that can adjust the shape of the thing, right? So,
yeah, the extrinsic eye muscles are extraordinary, and I mean, even on a shark, which is a remote ancestor of ours, just to go back to comparative anatomy space, it is obvious in retrospect how much selection has built into the ability to not just move around, but shape the shape of the eye orbit and the eye itself.
absolutely. And this is a soft optic, right? It's all about the shape of that thing and some very simple physics. And if you deny it information about what it's actually seeing, especially by correcting it, the point is, these work great. No, they work great with that thing in front of them, right? They don't work very well at all without it. So there's also lots in this piece that goes to some other issues, which are places where we chronically underestimate the complexity of the systems that we are trying to understand and ostensibly fix. One of them is, in this article, it is described that there's this issue where part of the story that suggested that, the eyes are basically becoming less functional because of bad genes, right? A simple bad genes argument has to do with heritability, right? And the fact that, identical twins had worse had eyesight that was more closely correlated than fraternal twins, right? Which seems to, in many people's minds, it just, it locks up the question, permanently. It answers it. And now in this article, they say something along the lines of, yes, but, identical twins share more than just genes. They also share a lot of the same influences, right? And this is a strange claim, but it is one of the things that dogs the claims of heritability and their implications about genes is that people leap from the idea that the heritability of something, and heritability is defined as a genetic term, it is, I think, mistakenly, but formally defined as the degree to which a alteration in form is the result of a genetic variant. This ignores the mechanism by which these variants have their implications, right? So you'll help me get this into clarity that people will be able to understand. Let's say that we had, I'm just going to describe the problem with heritability. Even where we actually measure correctly that it is there, we misunderstand the implications.
Can we pause for a second, though? Can you go back? So you said this thing about twins, and I had missed that in my read of the article, and I just went and looked at it. Can I just read the paragraph here? Because I don't understand what they're doing.
Yeah.
This is, again, a sentence from this article on myopia in The Atlantic this month. By now, scientists have moved past the faulty assumption that myopia is purely genetic. The idea took hold in the 60s when studies of twins showed that identical twins had more similar patterns of myopia than fraternal ones, and persisted in the academic world for decades. DNA does indeed play a role in myopia, but the tricky factor here is that identical twins don't just share the same genes. They're exposed to many of the same environmental stimuli too.
Well,
I don't understand. I don't understand how the last phrase of the last sentence strikes me as a totally bizarre place to end that.
Yeah, it is a bizarre thing, and I think it's sort of a hand-waving argument. I don't know if
must be,
what they've elided is identical twins raised apart, or it's not clear what they've missed, but they've missed a factor in there to explain why they're making the argument.
It would appear, if you just read this, it would appear that they're arguing that identical twins share more environmental stimuli than do fraternal twins.
So let me make my heritability argument, and then we're going to defend this bad paragraph. We're going to steel man it. Okay. So let's take a totally separate non-vision characteristic. Okay, and let's create a phony scenario in which we're going to see what's wrong with the modern instantiation of heritability. Let us say that a population of blue creatures has been enslaved by a population of orange creatures. Okay? In the enslaving process, the blue creatures were portrayed as less intelligent in order to justify the hierarchy of power. Okay, let's just say it's nonsense, but that was
That's
that
the
was
story
said.
the orange
That
creatures
was
told themselves.
That was the story the orange creatures used to rationalize their enslavement, their enslavement of the blue creatures. And then let's say that time passes and the blue creatures find their way to freedom somehow, and they now have to get along with the orange creatures. But the story in the orange population persists that the blue creatures are less capable. Okay. Now, what if you went and you measured the degree of blueness and some capacity like intelligence, right? And you found that it was indeed a bit lower. Oh, that's troubling. But the problem is, you don't know why the blue creatures are exhibiting this feature. In other words, discrimination by the orange creatures, who have the power at the point the blue creatures earn their freedom, right, is going to result in lots of things being poorly distributed, right? Things that might be enriching in childhood, etc., right? So the point is, you might actually find a heritability, that is to say, a genetic factor that does predict something about capacity. But it may be that that factor has nothing to say about how that capacity comes to be. What it does is if you found that, blue scales or whatever is on the surface of these creatures was correlated with low capacity, it is entirely possible that though genetically heritable, it has nothing to do with that gene describing anything that creates capacity. What that thing does is it describes a pigment that causes a creature to be discriminated against, which results in developmentally that characteristic being less elaborated. Does that make sense? So the point is,
the blueness, the thing that is actually genetically heritable, may not be coupled at a genetically heritable level with the capacity in this case.
Right. It's like,
but the phenotypic thing that shows on the outside can be recognized by others, and so can be used to basically, collect and do something collectively to those.
Right. And actually, let me take it
organisms.
one step more absurd just to make it really clear. Let's imagine that there was a gene for a sign that would emerge on your back that says "kick me." Okay, that's all the gene does. It just produces this sign on your back that says "kick me," and that people listen to the sign. Okay. Now that sign that says "kick me" is going to produce all kinds of other phenomena, right? You're going to be fearful. You're going to constantly be up against walls. Your behavior is going to be altered by the fact that you've been born with a sign that says "kick me" on your back, right?
Fearfulness is actually an adaptive response, but it itself is not genetically heritable.
Well, no, that's the thing I'm trying to convey.
Could become.
It is genetically heritable. It is genetically heritable. The gene that produces the "kick me" sign produces fear. It does not produce fear by altering your...
Indirectly.
It doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. From the point of view of how we study heritability, what we have is this gene is correlated with that phenotypic characteristic. The mechanism is not specified. And so, my point is, heritability itself is a broken concept, in part because all sorts of things that alter your phenotype in one way or the other may indirectly cause these things, which are not downstream of the gene itself, but are downstream of some characteristic that it produces. And we infer something because of our overly simple genetic model of the universe.
Right, but I think maybe you misheard me. I was very precise in saying it's genetically heritable, as opposed to heritable, which is the sensu lato description.
It is. This is what I'm telling you. If you go to the literature where the term heritability is used, this error is all over the place. We assume that genetically heritable means the consequence of the spelling of the gene. That's not what it means, right? It is a correlation that is agnostic with respect to mechanism. And so this has lots of implications, right, for claims that people make. which we won't go into here, but nonetheless, it is an error that is extremely hazardous because it allows us to rationalize things as well. That's features of the, the underlying genetic biology of the situation.
Okay, so let's get there. The point here is to correctly identify, oh, that thing is heritable, is in no way to say that thing is immutable.
Right.
Now, with an individual, it might well be, right? But it is in no way to say, therefore, you got it, I'm sorry, your kids are doomed to have it as well. They're not.
Right. It is exactly that issue. That basically, when people get to the point of, well, it's genetically heritable, they believe that what they have said is immutable, and they may have said nothing of the kind, right? You may be able to completely democratize something into fairness, even though it was genetically heritable. You may be able to remove it from genetic heritability if it is not the consequence of a genetic spelling producing this thing as a matter indifferent to the world outside. Okay, so now let's go back to steel manning that paragraph. Okay, which I don't believe deserves steel manning. I think it's just an error. But nonetheless, you could say identical...
The paragraph which is about identical twins, and which ends by saying, the tricky factor here is that identical twins don't just share the same genes, they're exposed to many of the same environmental stimuli too.
Right. Now, here's the thing. Identical twins look alike. Okay? So to the extent that they are broadcasting signals into the world that then cause the world to treat them in such a way, right, they may cause similar phenomena to emerge. And it is conceivable. It is at least within the realm of...
reducto ad absurdum, or however that's pronounced, with the don't kick me sign. Yep. If you have a genetic tendency to produce a don't kick me sign on you, if identical twins have some similar thing that they're producing in the world and therefore getting the same feedback from it.
There you go.
Even if they haven't met since they were born.
That is exactly it. That is exactly it. Okay, so...
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty good for rescuing a paragraph that's pretty hard to logically defend.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to make several points about this myopia paper. One, this is a classic case of hypernovelty, which did not...
I wanted to title this section, Hypernovelty is a Bitch.
Hypernovelty is a bitch. Okay, so this is a classic hypernovelty problem, and it has several of the annoying characteristics of these things, right? One of them is, I am sad to say that although I have been aware of the problem of us having a hypernovelty issue with development and vision, we did not fully protect our children from this. It's effectively impossible to do, right? Zach needs glasses. And the fact that Zach needs glasses...
Trivially, though.
Well...
Not to the extent that I do.
Yeah,
I mean,
he's not...
Now I only wear them to drive, pretty much.
Okay.
I take them off every other time. But.
And you're not...
All right, so I don't know to what degree people could hear that. Zach says now he only needs them to drive, can do everything else without. And I don't know what your diopter is, but you're like 20/40, which is really not that bad. Which just means that what someone with perfectly normal vision can see at 40 feet, you need to be 20 feet away from it to see it.
And I have the sense that it may be getting better. I don't know though.
It may well be getting better. Whereas someone with something like 2800 vision can't exactly get away with that.
Does it matter what you're driving at?
That's a good...
You don't have to answer that. No, it's not a very good point. You're very good at calling me out when I make a not a very good point, which is too frequently. Yeah. But here's the thing. I do think you may find that it gets better, especially in light of the fact that, like all kids now, you had a lot of close-in stuff put in front of you before, and your interests are now more diverse in terms of the distance that they are from you, and that may well provide the feedback, and even though it's late in your development, it may not be too late to partially or maybe even fully correct.
And unfortunately, where that's most true, driving, I can't get away with not wearing
right.
glasses.
Yeah, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
But,
yeah.
But my point is, there are lots of these problems where the fact that you know about it provides you some tool, but it doesn't provide you enough. Like, you're now stuck, as a modern parent, you're stuck with, do I raise my child in some way? Do I, freak out when they sit down to read, right? Because they may be damaging their feedback mechanism. Or do I accept that reading has become dominant enough that that allowing a certain amount of degradation of distance vision is worthwhile, right? I don't know what to do with that. I didn't know what to do with it, in our kids' case. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what to recommend. But here's the maddening place that the article ends, right? The article makes the exact right connection without linking to Mike Mew. Mm-hmm. It connects this failure of the eyes to develop correctly because we've denied them the proper feedback. Yep. And it says the same thing appears to have happened with teeth, right? Oh my goodness, yes, it has. The jaw is misshaped because we are not chewing on resistant enough stuff early enough in development. And then it says the absolutely stupidest thing it could say.
Can I read it?
Yeah.
So I'm going to read the penultimate paragraph too, because I think that recovers the article a little bit, but then I'll read the final paragraph.
Okay.
We may not know exactly how ogling screens all day and spending so much time indoors are affecting us, or which is doing more damage, but we do know that myopia is a clear consequence of living at odds with our biology. The optometrists I spoke with all said they try to push better vision habits, such as limiting screen time and playing outside. But this only goes so far. Today, taking a phone away from a teenager may be no more practical than feeding a toddler a raw hunter-gatherer diet. So, this is where we've ended up. Oh, incidentally, a raw hunter-gatherer diet?
Yeah.
Hunter-gatherers were not eating raw foods. Anyway, stop. So
they're probably talking about feeding them a raw hunter-gatherer.
So this is where we've ended up, for those of us who can afford it, adding chemicals and putting pieces of plastic in our eyes every day in hopes of tricking them back to their natural state.
So it is the point before this where they correctly say, oh, this is analogous to what has happened with the spread of the need for orthodontia, right? True. And then they say, but it's marvelous because we know what to do with orthodontia. We put braces on your teeth and get them straight, which is insane. That does not correct the misshapen jaw, right? It is a terrible kludge put on top of an unnecessary dysfunction that is actually totally remediable if you understand it from the get-go, right? So there's also a market aspect to what is revealed by this article. Yes. Right? There is enthusiasm about braces because it doesn't make the entire field of orthodontia go away. It makes it profitable, right? If you understand why malocclusion happens, then you also understand what is necessary to make it a very rare phenomenon. And if it's a very rare phenomenon, we won't need many orthodontists, will we? Right? So no, that can't be the answer. The answer has to be, we've got a modern problem and there's nothing to do about it. So what we have to do is aggressively come in with high-tech stuff and wizardry and fix your children by putting tension on their teeth, which, by the way, will wreck your teeth's roots if it's done badly, as happened in my case. So the problem is, look,
it's going to mess with your skull. It's probably going to mess with your eyes.
And the number of pathologies that are downstream of malocclusion is high because it's not your teeth that are out of place. It's your jaws, which are misshapen, which has effects on your breathing. It has effects on allergies. It has effects on attention deficit. All sorts of things are implicated. And interesting, there are 3 remedies in the piece for the eye misshapenness. 2 of them correct the light coming into it to give them a signal that development can follow to fix the eye, which is truly interesting, right? It's the opposite of glasses, which correct your vision coming into the eye so your eye doesn't know it's misshapen, right? It distorts the light coming in so that your eye will reform in the right way.
One of them being drops that dilates your pupils, which apparently, interesting little note from the article, is something that Cleopatra used to make her appear more sultry. Yeah,
I thought that was pretty interesting too. But all right, I'm mostly at the end of my rant. This is both a marvelous article in terms of what it reveals. This is finally dawning on people. We are at least 30 years late in the recognition. What we needed in order to understand that we were doing this to our own children has been apparent for a very long time. We have been slow to get there, and in some sense, I think the hidden message here is we're only now getting there now that we have some way to sell you a solution rather than to prevent the problem from happening.
Yeah.
Right? And that this has become what the market does to all branches of medicine, including orthodontia, dentistry, ophthalmology, right? It wants to sell you a solution more than it wants to prevent the problem from happening, and it is a terrible pathology for a medical system to have.
Yeah, and there's so much analogy to the experience with COVID as well, wherein this was a monster of our own creation, and the people who worked hard to create it are now trying to cover their tracks and pretend it came from nature. And regardless of where it came from, we are told you absolutely need our fixes to help you get fixed. And it's just the same story over and over again.
Yeah, they want to portray themselves as the hero rescuing us from a terrible villain from nature, when in fact they are the villain. And then they are the villain again in selling you a remedy that has these gigantic costs, which they weren't honest with us about.
Yeah.
Right? And it's, it's like, okay, how many times are we going to fall for this pseudo-scientific garbage by the people who are nominally our scientific leaders?
Yeah.
When are we just going to start,
Yep. Although still being fooled at this point, shame on you. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me.
Yeah.
So everyone who's still fooled,
wake up.
wake up.
Yep.
Time to wake up.